Welcome back to the Peak Performance Podcast, and I'm super excited to have another one of our amazing community members here, Graham Charbonneau. We'll call him Charbs. Mate, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
No, of course. Jamie, you good?
Very
to go?
good, ready to go.
Excited for this one. Now, before we get started, I think you should be listening to this one in bed because Charbs' voice is so soothing. I think we need to do like an episode of is it ASMR or something like that?
Recorded meditations or something.
Amazing. So if you're driving, please turn this off because the soothing voice is just going to ease you into relaxation, mate. I'll stop talking smack. There are so many pathways I feel like we could take this conversation. One of the most interesting in a very good way, men that I've ever met in my life, whether it be through your sporting prowess, another ice hockey athlete. We had Tash Farrier in another one of our episodes. You're a business owner, very successful, which we'll dive into. You are a dad as well. You've had massive contributions to PEAQ. Where I want to start is your, input into PEAQ 2.0. So Charbs was a part of PEAQ 1.0's community through the ice hockey connection. And I remember I put together a drawing of PEAQ 2.0 of what I imagined in my head. And I thought I'd done a wonderful job on paint.
2003 paint style, what you do in year 3 at school. Sean tried his best, but we pretty much came to Charbs begging, saying, can you fix this even just a little bit for us? Because we have no idea what we're doing.
So essentially the architects or the builders took my great concept and tried to turn that into something that was functional. And now that I look back at it, Charbs was absolutely horrendous. Can you talk me through, your involvement in 2.0 and sort of let everybody know how that sort of eventuated and some of the first things that came to mind when you saw some of these beautiful drawings that have been put together?
I guess it was interesting to say the least. The first thing that came to mind was probably that some of the rooms weren't physically big enough to fit the equipment that you were trying to put into them, so that was going to be an issue. But yeah, it was really, I think what you had conceptually was sound. It was really just about making the spaces more functional, so more usable, and ensuring that what you wanted to put into them was going to fit. That was the basis of it all. And
let's make sure we give it a shout out as well. So Charbs is the co-owner of Studio Graham, which is an award-winning Australia-wide business. It's amazing and what you've done to this space. So many people actually talk to us about the functionality of it. I think particularly as you come through that sort of consulting area where the saunas flow into the baths, which flow into the showers, which I think that all resulted in a bit of a dead end in the old plan as well. But please, if you are listening to this, go and give the great man a follow on socials. They've just opened up a amazing new space in Bowden, is that right?
Brompton,
right on the
border.
Yeah, right on the border.
Yeah.
So get around him as well, guys. But as being super impactful for us, I remember actually, I think the builders were probably rubbing their hands together every time that Jamie and I went in by ourselves, and they just sort of kept adding on some expensive pieces that maybe didn't add to our functionality at all. And then when Charbs came rolling in with us one day,
we brought in the big dog with the knowledge and the know-how, and suddenly things got a bit easier. But I guess diving into your world a little bit more, Charbs, I know what we joke and what we presented to you wasn't great, but how big of an impact does what you do have on a space in terms of that feel? We're a community gym and, sort of have that feel. And I know we had lots of those conversations about flow and functionality. How important is that in the work that you do?
I think for us, and particularly in all the work that we do a lot of hospitality work, a lot of residential work. Not a lot of commercial work, but a little bit, when the moment's right for us. But functionality is key, and we always talk about that. So this idea of, form over function that a lot of people tend to push when it comes to architecture, interiors, we tend to operate in the opposite direction of that. It's certainly not that we're not interested in form and creating beauty, but ultimately for us, if a space isn't functional, then the beauty aspect of it is lost, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't really matter what it looks like. So we like to kind of push the functional aspects of design really hard, and and then in concert to that, try to create something that's beautiful as well.
And I think that ties back in quite nicely to some conversations Sean and I have had about the private side of S&C. And, there are elements definitely of our building and what we have that are quite eye-catching, and the colours we think we're really proud of and happy with. But there definitely are maybe more boutique-y gym spaces that look really Instagrammable and really beautiful, and people, sort of see them and are drawn to that, which is absolutely, as you said, is important. But for us, that functionality of the space was really key, and you were obviously really instrumental in that. And that's essentially what makes the business function, is can you actually fit all these people into the gym, and can they easily go from one space to another? So, that's obviously played a big role in where we are now.
I'm sure PEAQ is right at the top of the list, but what are some of the what are some of the other businesses or buildings or organisations that you've worked with and helped design the layout?
Good question. I guess if you eat or drink anywhere in Adelaide, there's a good chance that you've been in one of the establishments we've designed. Some that come to mind quickly are places like Augie, Fugazi, Lee Street Wine Room, Sonny's Pizza, the whole swath of kind of restaurants down at Henley Beach around kind of Melt and Sea Salt and West that sits above, that's now been rebranded to be Henley House. Lots of residential work locally, so more private-based residential work. We're getting into the kind of hotel space. Did Indigo Hotel in the Adelaide CBD. We did the Monardo Hotel up at Monardo, as well as the Monardo Visitors Centre. So lots of spaces. We like to say that we kind of work on lifestyle-based projects, and we kind of divide them into these categories that we refer to as live, work, and play.
Amazing. And in saying that, I guess maybe we can take a few steps back. I obviously wanted to dive straight into 2.0, but the journey of your physical transformation with us here at PEAQ has been amazing. And there's some people who may not have seen you for a couple of weeks or months or over that period and almost didn't recognise you because of your body composition change. I know that you are big in promoting health and wellness and wanting to maybe change some of the narrative of that within sort of your world. Can you tell us about, first of all, let's chat about your physical transformation. Was there, I guess, a reasoning behind that, or was there something that sparked you to make that happen? And then I'd love to delve sort of further into your passion about your want to change the health and wellness in your industry as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I guess it's actually, funnily enough, almost 3 years to the day. So April 13th, 3 years ago. So it's 2022. I went in for surgery, which was pretty major surgery. So I had my aortic valve replaced. I was born with a bicuspid valve that wasn't found at birth. It was found later in life, and it's something that you can't affect, essentially. So there's no way to make it better or worse. It's I had a regurgitation, essentially, in my aortic valve. So it's meant to be a one-way valve, but every time my heart was pumping blood, some of it was going backwards. And the reality of that condition is that at some stage, kind of unknown to everyone, your valve will have to be replaced. Your heart will essentially start working too hard, which becomes dangerous, and it'll enlarge, and then you have to go in and have the surgery. So yeah, almost 3 years ago to the day, I had that surgery, and that was probably a moment for me, even though it was obviously very health-related because it was my heart, but it wasn't health-related in the way that nothing about my lifestyle was affecting that condition. But it was a moment of reflection for me, being, as you mentioned, a dad. So at the time, my kids were, I believe, 2 and 5, so quite young. A moment of kind of reflection, sitting in a hospital bed by yourself while you're about to kind of go through this process of having your kind of heart removed from your chest, and a pretty major operation. It probably made me reflect on where I was in my life in terms of my health and understanding that I could be healthier. So I'd gone through, I guess, my teenage years of being quite involved in ice hockey and being, reasonably fit, I think, for amongst my peer group. And then when I decided to stop playing hockey, I probably took a turn more into enjoying other parts of my life. So partying was probably prioritized over pretty much everything else, which meant that my health wasn't prioritized, and that had kind of extended for much longer than it should have. So it was a big moment for me in terms of my personal kind of reflection on where I was at, and probably also like the father that I wanted to be, and what I could offer my kids as a role model, and just getting back to full health, right? So there was this opportunity that presented itself, and part of that journey for me was really about, I guess, reconsidering my relationship with things like alcohol, and part of that was almost forced in a way. Like, I was never told by the doctors that as part of my rehab I couldn't drink or do anything like that, but when you're part of my recovery was because it was full open heart surgery, so my sternum was broken and kind of wired back together, and part of that recovery is that you effectively can't do anything for 12 weeks. You can't lift anything. So I couldn't lift my kids, couldn't lift a bag of groceries, couldn't do anything. So I kind of took that as a moment to be like, well, if I can't do anything for 12 weeks, I'm not going to like sit on the couch at home and drink beers. So I took that as an opportunity to just be like completely clean for 12 weeks. And that then progressed into the cardiac rehab part of the journey. So there was this, for me, a natural progression that I thought, well, I might, there's no point to just, because I've gotten past that 12-week stage, to start drinking again. So I had kind of extended that, and then I went through probably about an 8-month process of the cardiac rehab. And I guess a short-winded way of describing that is it's really about kind of heavily monitored exercise with super low weights, just to see how, because ultimately your heart's a muscle, right? So for your heart to rehab and to make sure that you can put it under stress again, they need to start. So you start at your extremities. So you start with lower legs, really light weights, progress that into your upper legs. Then the weight-bearing exercises got greater. Then I could move into kind of arm work, and kind of finally with chest. So they wanted you to be working the furthest away from your heart as possible with the lowest weight, and then progressively increase that. So at about the 8-month mark, I got the all clear to kind of go into full-scale exercise with no real restrictions. And at that point, it had been almost a year that I hadn't drank at all. And I guess for me, that then became this catalyst where I kind of thought back to, I guess, what you hear and what you read, and one of the big things about kind of entering into probably like a weight loss journey, or even like if you really want to improve your fitness, I think it's impossible to ignore the kind of science out there that eliminating alcohol is probably the best thing that you could do. And I kind of thought, well, I've done the hard part. I've gone 12 months. I haven't drank anything. I'm probably in the best situation now to like really, really go at this if I want to get back into the kind of shape that I used to be in when I was a teenager. So that was really the kind of catalyst and the shooting point for me. And then it just became a priority in my life, which it wasn't for so long. And that's, I guess, how it all happened.
That's an amazing story, and credit to you for taking, that little moment of reflection to push you forward into making a change. I know we had some chats throughout that period. You prioritise a lot of your recovery as well. So, you indicated that you were really interested in how can I use the sauna and the contrast bars in particular for your recovery. And Sean can probably talk a little bit more specifically on this, as the sauna as a modality to really target your cardiac health and cardiac fitness as well. So you sort of jumped into using those, didn't you?
Yeah, I use them quite extensively. I probably would average out at about 3 to 4 times a week, and it's usually kind of post-workout. And part of that is just spending a lot of time in this place, which is great. But yeah, a lot of that was also around, I think, not just and same with being in the gym, I guess, not just the physical aspect of being in here, and I guess the transformation that it's had physically, but also mentally, I think. I think running a business, as you guys well know, isn't, it's not all roses. It always looks great from the outside, but, we all know that there are times when you can't get it out of your head, right? So for me, I think as soon as I kind of open the front door of the gym, or kind of sit down in the sauna or in the bath, there's nothing else that really kind of goes through my mind, and it's a real moment of clarity and calmness for me. So that's been kind of a huge change. And there is, as you mentioned, you would know way more about it than me, but there's all the kind of physical aspects that are great about spending time in the sauna and in the bath as well.
For me, I think we're fortunate in this generation that things are changing, but particularly in Australian culture, and you obviously have moved over here and emigrated over here. Part of the culture is drinking, and a lot of social situations are centered around that, and often there is, peer pressure. I think that's starting to dissipate now, and there's obviously alternatives. Did you find yourself particularly challenged in any social situations, like with the lack of alcohol, for example, and cutting that out of your life? And if maybe there's anybody listening who wants to make those same decisions but isn't as resilient as you and just has had a hard no for 12 months, are there any strategies that you put in place to assist you in avoiding?
Yeah, well, I think a part of it, I have spoken to a few people about this because people are interested, and I think generally the interest comes from a position of kind of wanting to explore it. And I think a big thing is there are some kind of social norms, and they are shifting, but they're still there. You know, like early on, particularly at kind of corporate events, as soon as I said no to a drink, the question would be like, "Oh, is something wrong with you?" You know, like, and not necessarily from a negative point of view, but almost from a concern point of view. Like there's almost this social norm that if you're not drinking, it's obviously I'm not pregnant, but if you're a female, I think it's right away the pregnancy question comes up, and then with men, it's like, is there a medical condition that's preventing you from having a drink today? So I think part of it is kind of being okay with that because I think it will be asked, and the other side of it is probably getting over it yourself. I think a lot of the kind of social anxiety around it is also your own kind of perception of self, and a lot of people, and particularly depending the route you go through, you know, like I mentioned before, I spent a kind of big part of my 20s and 30s probably partying more than I should have, and I think in going through that, a lot of my own kind of self-identity was like this personality that I had that was centered around like being kind of, you know, probably that guy at the party that was like boisterous and loud, and I think understanding that I could kind of still be myself in a social situation without the inclusion of drinking, and really understanding that my personality wasn't a product of the partying, I guess, and that I wasn't going to lose that part of myself in a social situation. So I think for me, when I realized that, it became a lot easier because it wasn't, when you understand that, I think you also understand that no one else really gives a shit. It's probably more, it's you that is probably worried about it. And when you can kind of convince yourself that it's not an issue, then you realize pretty quickly that it actually isn't an issue. And I think generally, and you know, this is probably a big statement to make, but generally if someone has a problem with it, they're probably the problem in a lot of ways, you know,
sure.
like, and I think it's probably a reflection on themselves more than it's a reflection on you. And they probably understand that they are potentially the person that need to make changes. So they find it quite confronting that you can be in a social situation and not be consuming alcohol.
Just on those social norms too, I know we've had some discussions outside of this podcast about you know, that social norm of a lot of industries having knockoff drinks, and that's the way that a lot of colleagues connect outside of work, and that you, outside of having an amazing award-winning business for being good at what you do, want to leave a legacy that's maybe a bit more than just your work. Can you talk us through what that looks like and what you're sort of hoping for and planning for?
Yeah, so I guess tomorrow will be our first session here at PEAQ as a team. So I think we'll be in your hands, but I think we're going to go through like some breathwork sessions, bit of time in the sauna and the contrast baths, and a lot of that is driven by our staff's interest as well as our own. But I think there's a real issue, and I don't think it's only exists in the architecture industry, but the architecture industry is very well known for kind of pushing the boundaries in terms of kind of work-life balance, work hours, and it is quite a high-stress environment. There's a lot of talk around wellness, but not a lot of action. So we've kind of taken it upon ourselves that we think there's an opportunity for us to start implementing better practices for our own staff. And I guess that's going to start tomorrow formally. It started a long time ago in terms of we work really hard to keep to normal working hours. We understand, appreciate, and also have a desire for our staff to have enriching lives outside of our studio. We also don't think that it needs to be this kind of 24-hour, 7-day-a-week process to create meaningful work as an architect. In fact, I think if you can disconnect and come back feeling fresh and reinvigorated, you actually produce better work. And I think that's probably true of every industry. But I think, you know, as a plan, there is a plan that is kind of being worked on in the background, and we've had discussions about working on that stuff with you guys as well. But outside of our own team, we would like to kind of open up to the broader industry, and we don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but the studio that Sean mentioned that we moved into last year was designed with this kind of purpose in mind. So the workspace is very easy to clear out. It probably takes about 10 minutes. It gives us around 100 square meters of open floor space with kind of audio-visual capabilities. So whether that's going to be hosting talks from people like yourselves or bringing you in to do a yoga session or mat Pilates or a more kind of physical-based exercise, but also having that a kind of real keen interest on the kind of mindfulness side of the wellness space as well, and how much of an impact that can have on people. Even just simple strategies like some of the stuff I've learned in here from you about around kind of breathing techniques and a lot of the science around that really simple kind of breathing exercises, even done for very minimal amounts of time, the kind of reduction that can have on your stress levels, and I think, you know, the overall long-term kind of health benefits of being able to kind of provide that to people as strategies to deal with in their kind of day-to-day stresses that they deal with at work.
Yeah, and it's about a lot of these things too. Is just about opening the doors, right? And by you presenting that, you know, you can't control what people above you or the big corporations, whether they take any of this on or whether there's any traction. But, you know, I know legacy is a word you've used a lot in our conversations, and part of that legacy and, you know, what we sort of hope to do within our business as well with closing the gap between local and elite is, just opening those doors and providing people with those opportunities, and maybe one or two of your staff members pick up some of that and do implement it and then talk to their friends about it, or you go to a conference and someone says, oh, we did this at work the other day, and just presenting that information in front of people I think is really important.
What I've loved about these conversations is we see different worlds sort of collide with each other. I know certainly in a sport, strength and conditioning, exercise science world, it's very finite and objective, and we want to see hard numbers. And yes, absolutely, there's the art to it, but there's pressure from powers above. I know from your perspective, you know, I imagine that's a pretty, I guess, even balance between the art and the creativity, but also function and objectiveness with others in your industry, and you pushing, I guess, lack of a better word, this agenda of health and wellness. Do you think there's going to be people who want to see some hard evidence as to the impact, you know, that it's going to have positively, or are they going to want to see numbers on productivity from your staff members? And do you have any anecdotal evidence of that? I know you're only sort of officially formalising the journey starting tomorrow, but is there anything, because you've been pretty aware of this point in time, you think actually I can see my staff members are happier, or we've actually been able to produce more work or better qualities of work? It's probably a complex question there, but anything along those lines, do you think? Or is there a way you're going to try to track the productivity of the outcomes that this might have on your crew?
Yeah, I think it's it's certainly a difficult thing, I think, to track from like a hard number point of view. I think in terms of emotional awareness and tracking that, there's certainly already been feedback, particularly I think as we've grown as a practice. So in our earlier days, a lot of our current staff body are people that have kind of almost come straight out of university and worked with us and for us for the extent of their current careers. So the data, I guess, or understanding we get from them is flawed in a way because they haven't been parts of other practices. But one of the interesting things is some of our more recent staff members have come from bigger practices that certainly employ I guess, different practice principles around work hours and things like that. And some of the feedback we get from them on that more emotional level, so the way that they feel rather than kind of hard numbers, is quite positive. And I think there is this interest. Dave's my business partner, were speaking yesterday when we were on a flight, particularly with this coming up today and the kind of first session tomorrow around this idea. And I think we probably don't know how to do it, but I think we would like to try to find a way to track whatever we can to see that it's actually working. And a part of that is for our own interest, but also to kind of prove it to the broader industry that it's a worthwhile thing to kind of undertake, so that we can try to force people's hands. But I also think there's this really interesting intersection that we've kind of always seen in our business where Dave comes from a sporting background as well. He played footy at quite a high level growing up and kind of through university. And most of our, well, probably not most of our team. I think now that we've grown a bit, it's probably about 50% of our team do come from quite high level sporting backgrounds, and we see the translation in their work. And probably one of the things we really see translated is that kind of dedication and discipline. I think, there's no secret that to perform at a high level as an athlete, there's a certain level of kind of talent that you need to have, and a lot of that is this natural talent that can't be taught. But I think the separation factor quite often in sport is then that level of dedication to the craft, which includes a dedication to your kind of health and fitness. And we were talking yesterday about this why that hasn't necessarily translated. I think it is a little bit more now. There's certainly been a shift in like the entrepreneurs of the world that used to, I think, probably as recently as like 10 years ago, the kind of bragging rights in that world was that I can operate on 2 hours of sleep a night. And now the bragging rights in that world are like, I get 10 hours of sleep consistently. I spend 20 minutes in the sauna. I contrast bath every morning. And it's like, I think because people have really realized that it's not, this idea of health and fitness and high performance isn't restricted to people that compete in sports. Like, I think to be the best in any industry, there's an element of that requires you to kind of treat your body the right way as well, and spend time and energy making sure that everything within your system works at its highest capacity as well.
Absolutely. We haven't really touched much on the ice hockey, and we probably won't get into that. We've done lots of sports with some of our other guests. You then had this sort of party era that you could sort of almost label it as, and then a bit more of a health focused, almost like rehabilitation. What is your goals with training now, if you don't mind me asking, and what's your relationship? Is it more maintenance? Is it still quite sort of health based in terms of when you come in here when we see you here at 10 o'clock at night, which is well past my bedtime?
Yeah.
Is there anything specifically you're training for? Do you follow programs, or is it ticking along and happy just to keep the body moving?
Yeah, probably a bit of everything. I don't think I have a specific training goal. I listened to Walshy's podcast the other day, and I think one of the things he said probably resonated with probably where I'm at from a goal point of view, and it's probably that I want to be as fit as I can be, as old as I can be in some ways. Like I'm 43 in a couple of days, so I'm probably not as young as I like to convince myself I am anymore. But I'm also probably at a position right now where I would probably be fitter than I was when I was playing a high level of hockey in my teenage years. And that's probably, I don't think something I ever anticipated was going to happen. Like post-heart surgery, when I decided I kind of want to really give this a proper go and kind of go at it as hard as I could, my goal was certainly never to kind of eclipse the fitness levels I had as like a 17 or 18-year-old hockey player. But I can well and truly say that I've done that. I do follow a program. I think for me, my goals are probably more centered around this just the general idea of fitness, and probably more around things like mobility. So I'm not, I certainly don't have any goals to, increase my 1 rep maximum on probably anything on the gym floor or kind of.
I can see Jamie smirking over there. Look at her. She's just every time.
These people do exist that don't want to just do chin-ups and bicep curls, Sean. Please continue, Sharps.
And maybe that's because chin-ups are probably my least favorite exercise.
Yes, me
and
too.
maybe that comes from a point that I'm just not really that good at
I've got
them.
really short arms, so I'm made to do them, Sharps.
But, and I think part of that comes down to that dad thing. Like, the fact that my mobility is probably better than it's ever been, to be honest. And the fact that I can, like, get on the ground and get up and down without thinking about it and with ease, and almost in some ways, certainly can't move like my 5 and 8-year-old can, but I'm a lot closer to being able to move like them than I was 3 years ago. And I think like that is probably what drives me and what motivates me in a lot of ways. And I just think about like that mobility piece and how important that is for aging. Like I think, as I get older, I don't really have any interest in how much I can bench press. have much more interest in whether or not I can bend over as I grow older. I think I put my socks on without sitting down, and like simple things like that. I think one of the, I can't remember who it was, but one of the this older woman who's quite prominent in the mobility industry, and I should know her name, but I don't at the moment. But there was a podcast I heard with her, and she said one of the best exercises you can do is to stand up when you put your socks on. So, you know, get on one foot, bend your leg, and put your sock on, you know, the balance that you get out of it and the mobility. And if that's something that you can do when you're like 70, 80, kind of pushing those ages, it's like, it's pretty incredible thing to be able to do. And so I've started like, it's just such a simple thing, but every morning I never sit down to put my socks on now. And it's a kind of a little thing that I do that, and funnily enough, I think if you're listening to this podcast and you've never tried it, try it. Because probably most people can't actually do it without falling over. Cause
we need to do a video for social media after this and see what Sean's ability to put a sock on while standing up is.
You know, in saying that, you've inspired me.
Set a new trend. We're going to set a new Instagram trend. Can you stand up and put your socks on?
Like, you've got me thinking though, because I actually can't. I think maybe just out of
Can
pure
you come back
laziness.
next week, Sharp? Sean's learning things.
Yeah, here we
This
go.
is great.
I think out of pure laziness, I just always sit down, to be honest with you. So from here, you've changed my life. This has already sparked me to want to change my habits. So we'll work on mobility, and there'll be some videos going up of socks on while standing up. Maybe that should be our warm-up for class. Like everyone get your shoes and socks. Anyway, we'll delve into that. Usually what we do to finish off, we always like to keep it nice and tight to our 30 minutes, and I feel like I could chat to you all day. But for somebody who has so many things going on in your life, obviously, you know, running an award-winning business, being a dad, still getting training in. You know, when we first met you doing administrative work in ice hockey as well, sort of in the back end of things. How do you squeeze it all in? You know, how do you still find the time to get here and get your training done for whatever duration of time that is, and continue that health journey? Because you know, we see a range of obstacles and hurdles for people, and there's some people who I look at that. If I'm transparent, I think there's ways you could probably still sneak things in. For somebody like you, I think, oh my God, like how do you still find time to squeeze it in because you've got so much on your plate?
Yeah, I think that was a big thing for me. It was probably being honest with myself about that. I think for years prior to the surgery, it was really easy to just tell myself that I didn't have time. You know, I had young kids at the time. I had a business that was growing, so there's all this kind of pressure around that, and was probably working too many hours. But I think when you really think about it, there's plenty of time that you spend doing nothing. And if you replace that with time at the gym, there's always time, I think. And for me, it was about being realistic about when that time is. You know, a lot of people in the fitness industry love to talk about the early mornings, but one of the things that my wife and I have done, and I guess being part of a family unit and respecting each other, is that my wife does mornings. So she goes to the gym typically at kind of, I don't know, 5 or 6 while I'm still sleeping. And the reality of that is that meant for me, and to be honest, I'm not really a morning person. Like, my worst nightmare is trying to lift weights at 5 in the morning. I don't think my body is really awake at that time. But it was really about then being honest with myself. And I do, you know, really love my kids, and I love being a present father and kind of taking as much of the strain off of my wife as I can. I think it's, you know, if you're going to have kids, I'm a firm believer in the fact that you're in it together, and I make that split as 50-50 as I can. My wife also runs a business, so she's quite busy. So for me, it was about the evening. I like to be there to put my kids to bed, to have dinner with my kids. So that meant after work wasn't an option. So it is post kids bedtime, which is probably why, you know, as you watch me on the cameras, it's getting later. It's getting later and later because as my kids get older, their bedtime's getting later and later. But it really is. I've replaced the, like, I guess those doom scrolling hours, or like watching something on TV that I'm not actively watching that I had no interest in, with coming to the gym and prioritizing that over probably just wasting time sitting on the couch, or, you know, opening my laptop at those hours, when really I don't think there's any real functional kind of benefit to doing that. I don't think I'm that productive at that time of night when it comes to work either. So for me, it's been, just about being honest with myself about that I do have time, but I just have to prioritize using that time for fitness-based kind of activities.
Sharps, Incredible, mate. What a journey, what a story. We could continue to talk for hours, as I said. If you see Sharps on the gym floor, go say good day. Don't take up too much of his time because he needs to get to bed so that he still gets his 10 hours of sleep in and can do his contrast bath the next morning. But, you know, the impact you've had on our community, on this facility is something that we just can't put a value on. We love you dearly. We're super proud of your physical transformation as well and can't wait to continue to sort of share this journey with you, mate. So thank you for your time and can't wait for everybody to hear it.
I think, yeah, in closing, I think I probably have to return the sentiment. You know, I think I met Sean just before the heart surgery, so through ice hockey, and obviously from an ice hockey perspective, I think the fact that you've kind of gone out of your way to help such a niche sport in this country is pretty incredible, and you should be commended for that. And I think a big part for me in being comfortable at the gym is the kind of community the two of you have built and the opportunities you've created for people in here. So, yeah, I don't think any of this would have been possible without you guys either. So thank you so much for everything.
Thanks, mate. Really appreciate it. So there you go. What an insightful chat with Sharbs. My two takeaways are, number one, for those who are potentially thinking about moving away from alcohol, often it's about building it up in your own head more than actually the practical application of moving away from drinking. And number two, you don't have to train for 1 RMs. You could train by simply putting on your socks while standing up.